The American people are going to have to choose between the Bill of Rights and the Thomas Committee. They cannot have both. One or the other must be abolished in the immediate future.
House Un-American Activities Committee was founded in 1938, a congressional effort to root out subversive activities and disloyalty among the American public. At first, HUAC focused on activities in the government, namely the alleged infiltration of the Works Progress Administration and Federal Theater Project by communists. During the Great Depression, the Communist Party had been seen as a viable alternative to the political and economic systems of the day. Many Americans, especially unemployed workers and artists, joined the party in hopes of a better future. Throughout World War II, the Communist Party became known as patriotic for its anti-fascist, pro-war stance. Thus, HUAC's anti-communist action was never widely appreciated by the wartime public. Both the Soviet Union and United States emerged as victors from World War II. Now the question arose, which country would become more powerful? As both nations sought to extend their spheres of influence, Cold War fear began to sweep the nation. HUAC became a standing committee in 1945, changing the scope of investigation from public employees to the nation as a whole. Propaganda films and radio programs were widely distributed, and popular support for the HUAC reached enormous levels. The committee's harsh tactics, combined with its public support, made HUAC a virtually unquestionable institution.
Calling the House Un-American Activities Committee to order, Chairman J. Parnell Thomas of New Jersey opens an inquiry into possible communist penetration of the Hollywood film industry. The committee is seeking to determine if Red Party members have reached the screen with subversive propaganda.
In 1947, another American institution attracted the suspicions of the House Un-American Activities Committee. Now Hollywood found itself under the spotlight produced by its own propaganda. The Hollywood Reporter, a film trade newspaper, had published a list of suspected communists in the Screenwriters Guild, and from this list, HUAC subpoenaed many prominent screenwriters, directors, and actors to Washington, D.C.
A small group within the Screen Actors Guild which has consistently opposed the policy of the Guild board and officers or the Guild itself as evidenced by the vote on various issues. That small clique has been referred to, has been discussed as more or less following the tactics that we associate with the Communist Party.
Of those filmmakers called before the committee, 10 chose not to give information and were named unfriendly witnesses. Alva Bessie, known for Operation Burma, Herbert Biberman, who wrote and directed 10 successful films in the time before his hearing, Lester Cole, who later wrote the tremendously successful Born Free, Edward Dmytryk, that famous master of film noir, Ring Lardner Jr., who wrote the MASH screenplays, John Howard Lawson, writer of Cry the Beloved Country, Albert Maltz, who wrote Two Mules for Sister Sarah, Samuel Ornitz, also an influential Jewish novelist and playwright, Adrian Scott, known for Crossfire and Murder My Sweet, and Dalton Trumbo, writer of Roman Holiday and later Spartacus, were the Hollywood 10.
Either you completely cooperated with the committee, which meant saying yes or no to the question about whether you were a communist or ever had been, and if the answer was yes, as it was in my case, we knew the next question was who else was, and we certainly didn't want to go into that.
Are you a member of the Communist Party? Or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
It's unfortunate and tragic that I have to teach this committee the basic principles of Americanism.
That's not the question. The question is, have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
I'm framing my answer in the only way in which any American citizen can frame his
then you
answer
denied,
to a question
then you,
which invades his, absolutely invades
then
his
you
right.
denied, you refused to answer that question. Is that correct?
I have told you that I will offer my beliefs, my affiliations, and everything else to the American public, and they will know where I stand, as they do from what I have written.
Stand away from the stand.
I have written for Americanism for many years, and I shall
stand away from the stand.
Fight for the Bill of Rights, which you are trying to
take
destroy.
This man away from the stand. Have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
I believe I have the right to be confronted with any evidence which supports this question. I should like to see what you have.
Oh, well, you would.
Yes.
Well, you will pretty soon.
The hearings continued for 9 days, during which the Hollywood 10 maintained that the investigations violated their constitutional rights. All 10 were asked the question, "Are you, or have you ever been, a member of the Communist Party?" And all 10 refused to answer, citing their Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination, as well as the First Amendment rights to free belief that made the investigation irrelevant. Ultimately, the same constitutional rights that the 10 spoke out for were what landed them in prison. By maintaining their right to free belief, the Hollywood 10 had been called before HUAC, and by maintaining their right against self-incrimination, they had been found guilty for their failure to answer. On the 24th of November, 1947, the Hollywood 10 were sentenced to 1 year in prison for contempt of Congress. The Hollywood 10 were the most public of filmmakers vilified for their politics, yet many other Hollywood professionals found themselves under scrutiny for their political beliefs. Katharine Hepburn, Frank Sinatra, Orson Welles, and Paul Robeson all found themselves on industry blacklists. Charlie Chaplin felt so threatened by anti-communist suspicion that he left the country, and thousands of others had their voices silenced by industry-wide blacklists. The blacklist was a compilation of all movie professionals thought to be communists or communist sympathizers. Many on the list were not communists at all, or had simply spoken in support of communism at some point. But being on the blacklist was enough to cost an actor his job, erase his credits on the movie screen, and eliminate his career indefinitely. The blacklist lasted until 1960, when Dalton Trumbo took credit for the screenplay to Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
In the famous "I'm Spartacus" scene, Trumbo dramatized the solidarity of blacklisted filmmakers refusing to name names before HUAC, knowing it would cost them their livelihood in the process. But just as Spartacus remained in the American conscience, the rifts caused by the blacklist and the Hollywood 10 hearings remained etched in the film industry for decades. Filmmakers who had testified on opposite sides often refused to work with one another, and prominent informers like Elia Kazan were disparaged despite their accomplishments. However, the legacy of the Hollywood 10 extends far beyond the film industry. It expands into the life of every American citizen today. The Hollywood 10 displayed what it means to be a citizen under our Constitution, the rights and responsibilities of being American. According to the U.S. government, one of a citizen's responsibilities is to defend the Constitution. As American citizens, both the Hollywood 10 and HUAC held this responsibility. The Hollywood 10, while holding communist beliefs, fulfilled their responsibilities by defending their rights, while the HUAC members neglected their responsibility by infringing upon the rights of others in the name of democracy. Yet it was the Hollywood 10 who were punished, while HUAC remained a fixture of patriotism for the next 10 years. The American people accepted this discrepancy. Eager for protection from the communist threat, many were willing to overlook the Constitution in the name of national security and freedom. Yet America's freedom is derived not from its supremacy related to other nations, but from the inalienable liberties of its citizens. The questions of liberty, security, and the Constitution still apply to us today. In the weeks after the 9/11 bombings, Congress passed the USA Patriot Act, a law allowing the expanded surveillance of American citizens based on suspected beliefs. Under Section 215, the Act allows the U.S. government to collect any evidence from a citizen, regardless of whether or not said citizen is a terrorist. The Patriot Act violates a citizen's Fourth Amendment rights, but this was justified in the wake of 9/11 with the surrounding fear of terrorism.
We've seen the enemy in the murder of thousands of innocent, unsuspecting people. They recognize no barrier of morality. They have no conscience.
The Patriot Act still stands as law today. Actions taken under the Act, such as those of the National Security Administration's prison program, are still illegal, and in these instances, the continuing violation of Americans' liberty has been defended on the basis of national security.
My assessment, and my team's assessment, was that they help us prevent terrorist attacks. How are we striking this balance between the need to keep the American people safe and our concerns about privacy? Because there are some trade-offs involved.
It is important to remember that as American citizens, our freedom is our national security. Our constitutional rights are inalienable, and like the Hollywood 10, we have a responsibility to protect them. No fear, no threat, no kind of pressure should cause us to ignore these rights. We must take hold of them, embrace our rights, and embrace our responsibilities. In the words of Benjamin Franklin, those who sacrifice liberty for security deserve neither.